Sure, I'd be happy to translate and culturally adapt the script into American English, adhering to all your detailed requirements. Here is the fully translated and adapted script. My son had strictly forbidden me to go to his ranch, but after he passed away, the lawyer handed me the keys and said, "It now belongs to you." I was planning to sell it, but out of curiosity, I decided to stop by and see it first. The moment I opened the door, I was breathless, because inside was a message that said, "I'm glad you're here. If you're watching this video, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you are listening to my story of revenge from. I want to know how far it has traveled." I sat in the grand church in the middle of the city. The freezing air seemed to chill me to the bone. The intense scent of white lilies enveloped me, mixing with the unbearable weight of a nameless grief. That day was the funeral of Alexander, my only son. The church was packed with people. Friends, colleagues, distant and close relatives, all with bowed heads, reddened eyes, and tight lips. They had come to say goodbye, to give their last farewell to a man to whom I had dedicated my entire life to loving and protecting. But I was just there, rigid as a stone statue in the first pew, next to my daughter-in-law, Martha, and my granddaughter, Chloe. I forcefully swallowed my tears, clenching my teeth to keep from screaming. "I'm his mother," I heard. I had to be strong, even though my heart was shattering into pieces. Martha was sitting next to me, crying until she was voiceless. Her sobs echoed through the entire church, as if they wanted to tear apart that deathly silence. I didn't blame her. How could I? She had just lost her husband, the man with whom she had shared so many years. But looking at Chloe, my granddaughter, I felt a sharp pain in my chest. The 15-year-old girl, thin, kept her head down while her fingers moved restlessly over her phone screen. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. She just immersed herself in an absolute silence, as if she were trying to escape from that cruel reality. I wanted to hug her, to tell her something to comfort her, but my throat closed up. I didn't even know where to start, as I myself still didn't understand why Alexander had left so suddenly. After the ceremony, his in-laws, Mr. Arthur and Mrs. Evelyn, took charge of receiving the attendees. Dressed elegantly, with courteous gestures, there was something in the way they dominated the situation that made me feel out of place, as if I were just another guest, a stranger at my own son's funeral. Arthur shook everyone's hand, pronouncing words of thanks, but his eyes remained cold, without a trace of emotion. Evelyn, next to him, in an impeccable outfit, smiled with distant politeness. I was there, watching them, wondering why I felt so alienated. He was my son, my blood, and yet I seemed not to belong in that place. A few days later, just when I thought I could bury my grief in daily routines, a call from Mr. Ramirez, the lawyer, plunged me back into the abyss. "Mrs. Betty, I invite you to come to my office. It's something important." His voice, deep and serious on the other end of the line, sounded as if it held a secret for which I was not yet prepared. I drove to his office with my hands clutching the steering wheel, my heart heavy. The atmosphere in his office was suffocating. The smell of old paper and waxed wood oppressed my chest. He was sitting behind his desk and pushed a bulky brown envelope towards me. "This is Alexander's will," he said in a monotonous tone, as if reading a report. I opened the envelope with trembling hands. Inside were cold legal documents and an old metal key with an opaque surface, worn by time. So Ramirez began to read the will, every word stabbing into my chest like a knife. Alexander was leaving me the complete ownership of a property called Maple Creek Farm. That name paralyzed me. Maple Creek. The same name that for years Alexander had repeated with a serious face, with an almost pleading look. "Mum, I beg you, never go there," he would say. I didn't understand. Why? Why was he leaving me a place that he himself forbade me to go near? And why, on such a decisive day, was Martha, his wife, Chloe's mother, not present? My throat closed up, as if someone were tightly squeezing it. I looked at Mr. Ramirez, expecting him to say something to explain, but he just shook his head, saying that he didn't know anything more either, apart from what was written in the will. I left the office with heavy steps. The freezing key in my hand seemed to whisper something that I still couldn't understand. On the way home, I looked in the rearview mirror and was startled. A black SUV was following me, from the lawyer's office to the street near my house. I tried to calm myself, convincing myself that maybe I was mistaken, but my heart pounded hard. The vehicle only took another direction when I was close to arriving, leaving me with a sense of unease that was impossible to shake off. That night, I sat alone in the living room. The dim yellow light illuminated the family photos hanging on the wall. The house was so silent it was frightening. Only the constant ticking of the clock reminded me that time did not stop, even though my son's time had stopped forever. I opened the envelope, took out the key, and observed it. It was small, but it felt as heavy as if it carried a story I never knew. The memories came back, clear, as if they had happened yesterday. Alexander, a 10-year-old boy, with messy, curly hair and large brown eyes, held my hand tightly on a rainy afternoon. "Mum, I hate Maple Creek," he said in a trembling voice. "Never go there, okay? Only bad things happen there." I smiled, stroking his head, thinking it was just a childish fear. But that look of his, so distinct, now returned to my memory, sharp and painful. One morning, I decided I had to find the answer for myself. I left the house quietly, without telling anyone, not even Sarah, my sister. Sarah had always been with me in difficult times, but this time I wanted to face it alone. I was afraid that if I talked about it, I would lose my courage. I drove along winding roads, moving away from the city, heading towards Maple Creek. The further I went, the colder the air became, as if the earth itself was trying to warn me. The path leading to the ranch narrowed, covered with weeds that brushed against the tires. I had to grip the steering wheel tightly to keep from veering off the road. In the distance, an old wooden sign appeared, with the words Maple Creek Farm, barely visible, almost hidden among the thick branches. I stopped, my heart pounding in my chest. This was the place Alexander didn't want me to reach, and yet now I was right in front of it. The iron gate stood imposing, rusty, heavy, like a wall separating the past from the present. The padlock looked solid, covered in dust and cobwebs. I took out the key that Alexander had left. My hand was trembling so much that I almost dropped it. As I inserted it, I held my breath. A dry click broke the morning silence. I pushed the gate, and the squeal of the rusty metal sounded like the lament of a forgotten soul. A chill ran down my spine, making me shudder. I repeated to myself, "Betty, don't be afraid. Do it for Alexander." But my feet felt heavy as I crossed the threshold. I drove inside. The dirt road stretched ahead, flanked by green pastures that surprised me. I had always imagined Maple Creek as a place in ruins, just as Alexander described it. But it wasn't like that. In the distance, I saw wooden stables, new, carefully restored. The whinnying of horses resonated, strong and alive, as if wanting to awaken the whole land. I could see some people working, with their sleeves rolled up, carrying sacks of feed. This ranch was not abandoned. It was alive, breathing, as if someone had secretly taken care of it all these years. The main house appeared at the end of the road, old but meticulously maintained. The white paint was new, the windows shone, and the red shingled roof looked freshly replaced. I was stunned. This was not the image of a cursed place, as in Alexander's fearful memories. I parked the car and got out. My shoes touched the soft earth, and a feeling of bewilderment invaded me. I had prepared myself for a ruined site, but what I had before me looked like a dream built with love and meticulousness. I pushed the heavy wooden door, my heart pounding hard, not knowing what awaited me inside. Inside, the air was warm, full of life. The smell of polished wood and flowers floated softly, leaving me surprised. On the walls hung paintings of horses, each stroke full of vitality, as if they could jump out of the frame. In the corners, there were intricately carved wooden sculptures, each showing the care put into them. A red Persian rug stretched across the floor, soft under my feet. I walked, feeling like I was entering a house that wasn't mine, but that felt strangely familiar. In one corner, I saw a room decorated as a library, with shelves reaching the ceiling, packed with books in aged leather bindings. Next to it, a small painting studio, with an easel, watercolors, and an unfinished painting of the Maple Creek Valley. I stood motionless, looking at the still incomplete brushstrokes, as if Alexander had left it there yesterday. And then I saw it, the shiny black piano in the living room, gleaming under the sunlight that streamed through the window. On top was an old photo frame, Alexander and me, when he was just 8 years old. A boy with a radiant smile, hugging me on a summer afternoon. Tears welled up in my eyes, impossible to contain. "Alexander, what did you do here?" I whispered, my voice broken. Everything in that house seemed arranged not for a new owner, but for the return of a loved one. I felt my son's presence in every corner, in every object. But why? Why did he hide this place from me? Why did he forbid me to come and then, in the end, leave everything to me? I walked down the hallway with a heavy heart. Many wooden doors on the sides were locked, with no gap to peer through. I tried to open one, but it didn't budge. What secrets were hidden behind those doors? I wanted to break them down, to scream to release the helplessness, but I just stood there, my hand on the cold wood. I returned to the living room. My gaze stopped at the large oak table in the center. On top, a silver laptop was carefully placed, and next to it, a freshly opened red rose, still sparkling with dewdrops. I froze. That rose was like a message, as if someone knew I would come and was waiting for me. I took a deep breath and opened the computer. The screen immediately turned on, with no password, no login. A video was already queued up, as if waiting for me. Alexander appeared on the screen. My son, thinner than I remembered, his face gaunt but his eyes still warm, the same ones he used to look at me with when he snuggled on my lap on rainy days. He was wearing a white shirt and was in a room I instantly recognized, his small office at home, with messy shelves and a crooked landscape painting on the wall. "Mum," Alexander's calm voice sounded, though every word was like a stab in my chest. "If you are seeing this footage, it means I am no longer in this world." My whole world stopped. I felt the blood turn to ice in my veins, my breath caught in my chest. I wanted to scream, to smash the screen to keep Alexander from talking. But I stayed there, motionless, while tears streamed down in silence. Alexander was looking directly at the lens, as if he were looking at me, right here and now. "I'm sorry, Mum," he said in a hoarse voice. "I didn't want you to have to endure this." "But I don't have another choice," he began to recount, in a monotonous tone but heavy with pain. about the hereditary heart disease he carried from his deceased father, my husband, who passed away when Alexander was only 10 years old. He spoke of the consultation 3 years ago, when Dr. Cardwell, an old family friend, called him into his office and gave him a diagnosis that felt like a death sentence. The doctor said I only had 2 to 5 years left, Alexander said, holding up a thick medical file. He flipped through the pages one by one, pointing to scribbles and hospital stamps. I had checkups many times, with different doctors. They all said the same thing. I didn't want you and Martha to live my last days in anguish and fear. I wanted everything to be normal, as if nothing had happened. I covered my face, tears seeping through my fingers. My son, the one I raised, whom I loved more than myself, had hidden such an enormous secret from me. I remembered his smiles, the family dinners when he told jokes and played with Chloe. Everything was a facade. He carried death within, and I, his mother, didn't know it. I felt like I had failed, that I didn't deserve to be a mother. "Why, Alexander?" I whispered, my voice broken. "Why didn't you tell your mum?" Suddenly a creak echoed in the hallway, breaking the silence. The white curtain on the window shook violently, pushed by the wind. I was startled, my heart pounding in my chest, and I ran to close the window. The cold air rushed in as if trying to drag me out of this nightmare. I closed it forcefully, my hands trembling, and returned to the chair. But when I sat down, the previous video had already disappeared. Another one played automatically, and this time, Alexander's gaze was no longer warm. He stared intently at the camera, his eyes filled with a strange gravity, as if trying to say something before it was too late. "Mom," he said in a rushed whisper, "there is something more terrifying than death. I think someone wants me to get there sooner." I backed away without thinking. The chair scraped softly against the wooden floor. Cold sweat ran down my temples, tracing a path down my cheek. Alexander's words were needles piercing my heart. Poisoned? Who? Why? I looked around the room, and the sunlight streaming through the window suddenly turned icy. Everything in that house, the paintings, the piano, the red rose, took on a different, menacing meaning. I wanted to flee, to escape from that place, but my legs seemed nailed to the floor. At that moment, a silhouette appeared in the main doorway. I trembled, almost screaming, but I recognized Chloe. The girl was there, her hair disheveled, her eyes reddened, looking at me with a mixture of worry and fear. "Grandma," she whispered, her voice trembling, "I followed you since this morning. Why did you come all the way out here alone?" I was flustered. I slammed the laptop shut, as if trying to hide the terrible truth I had just heard. "Chloe, what are you doing here?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm, even though my heart was pounding. "I told you to stay home." "I couldn't," Chloe said, stepping inside, her hands clenched. "I saw you leave early this morning, and I was worried about you. You've been acting weird since Dad's funeral." She stopped, looking around the house, her eyes wide. "What is this place, Grandma? Why did Dad leave it to you?" I didn't know how to answer her. How could I tell my granddaughter that her father suspected someone wanted to harm him? That this place, Maple Creek, wasn't just a ranch, but a secret that even I didn't fully understand. I pulled her towards me, hugging her, feeling her small body tremble. "I just want to understand more about your father," I said, my voice hoarse. "Rest a little, my love. Everything will be fine." But I knew I was lying. Nothing was fine. I led her inside. I asked her to sit on the couch and poured her a glass of water. She looked at me with eyes full of questions, and I just forced a smile, trying to hide the fear that was growing in me. I wanted to protect her, to shield her from what I had just heard, but I knew I couldn't keep this secret forever. The brief calm was shattered by the roar of engines at the entrance. I went out onto the porch and saw a caravan of cars slowly approaching. Several gleaming Mercedes-Benzes stopped in front of the steps, kicking up a cloud of dust that enveloped me in a feeling of unease. The first door opened and Arthur stepped out. Martha's father, in a very expensive black suit, his face icy, showing no emotion. Behind him came Evelyn, Martha's mother, in a long grey coat, her sharp eyes scanning the ranch as if evaluating merchandise. Beside her was a man with greying hair, a thick briefcase under his arm, his gaze penetrating like a hawk's. I recognized him immediately. A lawyer, one of those you know is coming to cause trouble just by looking at him. "Mrs. Betty," Arthur said, his voice deep and flat, devoid of emotion, like someone dictating a sentence. "We need to talk. This ranch does not belong to you." His words hit my chest like a punch. I froze, my throat tight, unable to say anything for a few seconds. "What?" I managed to stammer at last, my voice trembling but trying to sound firm. "It is clearly written in my son's will. Alexander left Maple Creek to me. You have no right to be here." Evelyn smiled disdainfully, a cold, bitter grimace, as if I had said something foolish. "Paper is just paper, madam," she replied, her voice soft but venomous. "The law can be bent in many ways, if one knows how." She took a step forward, and the click of her heels on the brick floor resonated like a challenge. Chloe, who was behind me, suddenly stepped forward, her eyes wide, looking at her grandparents. "What are you talking about?" she said in a trembling voice, heavy with anger. "This belonged to my dad. He left it to my grandma, not to you." I took her hand and pulled her towards me, trying to keep her from saying anything more. I didn't want her to get caught in the line of fire, but her gaze, full of pain and confusion, pierced my heart. The grey-haired lawyer approached and placed his briefcase on the wooden table on the porch. He opened it, took out a pile of papers, and spread them out as if he were showing a hand of cards. "Mrs. Betty," he said in a monotonous but sharp voice, "I am Mr. Vargas, representative of Mrs. Martha's family. These are old property contracts, signed before Alexander drew up his will. We have proof that this farm belonged to an investment fund to which Mrs. Martha's family contributed capital for many years. Mr. Alexander's will, I'm afraid, won't carry enough weight in court." I looked at the papers, the crooked letters and the red stamps, but everything blurred before my eyes. "You are lying," I said. My voice was firm, though I was a mess inside. "Alexander never mentioned any investment fund. Do you think I'm going to believe this?" Mr. Vargas smiled, a flat, cold smile, without any warmth. "You may not believe it, but the court will. A long and costly lawsuit will make you lose everything, not just this farm. We just want you to understand that stepping back is your best option." I felt the blood rush to my head, burning. "Stepping back?" I almost screamed, unable to contain myself anymore. "Do you think I'm going to abandon what my son left me just because of some threats? You don't know who I am." But even as I said it, I felt the helplessness growing inside me. They hadn't just come to talk. They had come to declare war. Arthur looked at me, the corner of his lips raised in a cruel smile. "There are things you don't need to know, Mrs. Betty," he said, his voice so deep it gave me chills. "Just remember one thing. Never mess with this place." He turned away. The sound of his leather shoes against the tile floor echoed like hammer blows. Evelyn and Mr. Vargas followed him without looking back. They got into the car. The doors slammed shut, and the convoy drove off, leaving a cloud of dust. I stood there, motionless, watching the cars until they disappeared. Then I saw it fleetingly. The black SUV, identical to the one that followed me that day when I left the lawyer's office, was parked in the distance, near the iron gate, like a silently watching ghost. A chill ran down my spine. They had been watching me from the start, ever since I took Alexander's key in my hands. They knew I would come here. They were waiting for me. Grandma, what do they want? Chloe tugged at my hand, her voice full of panic, her eyes wide with fear. I looked at her. I wanted to say something to comfort her, but my throat felt tight. How could I explain to her that her maternal grandparents were trying to snatch her father's inheritance? How could I tell her that I myself didn't fully understand what was happening? I just squeezed Chloe's hand, pulled her towards me and whispered, "From now on, you can't take your eyes off me for a second. Promise me, okay?" The girl nodded, but I saw the confusion in her eyes. I led her back into the house, trying to hide the fear that was screaming inside me. In the silent house, the laptop screen was still on. Alexander's video had not finished yet. I sat down. With trembling hands, I turned the device back on, but I didn't dare to keep watching. Alexander's last words kept echoing in my head. "Someone wants me to get there faster." Who? Arthur? Evelyn? Or someone else, hiding behind the shadows that were following me? I stood motionless on the porch, my gaze fixed on the dusty road where Arthur's caravan had just disappeared. I hugged Chloe, trying to hide the tremor that ran through me, but the girl's eyes looked at me full of worry, as if wanting to ask something I wasn't ready for yet. "Mrs. Betty?" Suddenly a deep, hoarse voice came from the stable, pulling me out of that uneasy reverie. I turned around, startled. A man about 60 years old, thin, with a weathered face, was approaching. He wore a worn cowboy hat, and a hard-to-name sadness was reflected in his deep eyes. "I'm Elias," he introduced himself in a slow voice, as if every word had been carefully thought out. "I'm the ranch administrator. Mr. Alexander hired me 3 years ago." I looked at him with suspicion. After what happened with Arthur and Evelyn, I no longer knew who I could trust. But Elias just smiled, a melancholic smile, as if he understood the suspicion in my eyes. "The young man saved me from jail," he said, his gaze lost in a painful memory. "I owe him my whole life. You don't have to fear me." His words, sincere and serene, made me pause. Looking into his eyes, I discovered a loyalty that I hadn't seen in anyone since Alexander's departure. "Thank you, Elias," I replied, my voice broken. "But why are you here? Alexander never told me about you." Elias nodded, as if he expected the question. "He didn't want you to know too much, Mrs. Betty. He wanted to protect you." He paused, looked at Chloe, and then looked back at me. "But now that you have arrived, I think you have the right to know the truth." He led us on a tour of the stable, where 6 magnificent horses were carefully cared for. Each one bore a name linked to a memory of Alexander: Sun, Moon, Star, and Midnight. The black horse immediately captivated Chloe. The girl stroked its shiny coat, her eyes lit up for the first time since the funeral. "Grandma, this horse is just like the one Dad always talked about in his stories," she exclaimed excitedly. I smiled, though it hurt inside. "Alexander, my son, you built an entire world here, and your mother never knew it." "Did Alexander come here often?" I asked Elias, trying to keep calm, although my insides were a whirlwind. "Almost every month, ma'am," he answered, petting another horse. He repaired the stable with his own hands and personally supervised the workers who were building the greenhouse. He didn't trust anyone, except for a very select few. He stopped, looking at me seriously, as if he wanted to say something deeper. Mr. Alexander loved this place, but he also feared it. He said Maple Creek was both his dream and his nightmare. Elias's words were like another stab in my heart. I felt pain, but also pride for my son, Alexander, the son who hid a serious illness from me, who hid an entire world he had built here. I wanted to ask more, to delve into what Elias knew, but his gaze stopped me. Do you know? He lowered his voice, looking around cautiously, as if afraid someone was listening, that Alexander left you more than just a few videos. I was stunned, my heart pounding hard. What do you mean by that? I asked, my voice trembling. Chloe looked at me, then at Elias, her eyes full of curiosity, but also worry. Elias didn't answer right away. He signaled for Chloe and me to follow him, and he led us out of the stable, across a grassy lawn, to an old barn at the edge of the property. The barn looked abandoned for a long time. The wooden planks were rotten, the sheet metal roof was rusty. Elias took a rusty iron key from his pocket and opened the heavy door. The hinges creaked like a warning. "Follow me," he said in a deep voice. "Be careful with the steps." I squeezed Chloe's hand tightly and followed Elias inside. The interior was dark, permeated by a smell of dampness. Elias pushed aside a floorboard, revealing a secret passage that led down to a basement. I was paralyzed, my heart thumping. "What is this, Elias?" I asked, my voice choked. Chloe gripped my hand tightly, breathing raggedly. "Alexander called it his safe place," Elias said, holding an old flashlight whose weak light illuminated the narrow corridor. "You have to see what he left behind. But I warn you, what's down there could change everything." When we reached the bottom of the stairs, Elias raised the flashlight, illuminating the entire room. I gasped. It wasn't just any basement. The walls were reinforced with solid concrete, like a military bunker. Hanging on them were geological maps, detailed land plans, and satellite photographs, carefully fastened with nails. In the center of the room was a long table, covered with files, external hard drives, and modern computer equipment, the screens off but seemingly waiting to be turned on. I felt my heart beat violently, as if I had entered a secret world that Alexander had built underground. "Alexander called it the War Room," Elias said, his voice deep but firm, his gaze sweeping the place to ensure no one was listening. He knew that one day his wife's family would make a move, and he prepared for that day. Trembling, I approached the table and touched the first file. They were thick pages, full of numbers, signatures, and legal stamps. Land purchase agreements, along with reports from 3 independent oil exploration companies. I flipped through the pages, my vision blurred as I read each line. The land of Maple Creek, which I had always thought was barren, was actually sitting on a huge oil reserve. Its value wasn't measured in millions, but in billions of dollars. I looked up at Elias, with a lump in my throat. Alexander knew this. "Not only did he know it," Elias replied, his voice low, as if telling a painful story. "He fought to keep it. He didn't want to sell it. He didn't want it to fall into anyone's hands. He said Maple Creek was a legacy, not only for you, but also for Chloe." My heart felt like it was being squeezed. Alexander, my son, had been silently fighting the entire world, carrying a deadly heart disease, and still hadn't told me a single word. I felt pride and pain at the same time. But when I opened the second folder, my world collapsed. It was a lab report, accompanied by photos of strange, tiny, opaque white pills. The conclusion, in highlighted letters, almost made me fall down. The food sample tested positive for a high-dose cardiac stimulant. which can cause death in patients with a history of heart problems. The image of Martha flashed into my mind, as clear as a movie. The loving wife who prepared Alexander's meals with her own hands every day, always smiling sweetly as she set the plate before him. I remembered the times I would arrive at their house and see Martha cutting vegetables, preparing soups, as if that were her way of showing love. But now, every memory felt like a knife. I stumbled backward, clutching my hand to my chest, feeling someone squeezing my heart. "It can't be," I whispered, my voice broken. "Martha, it can't be her." Elias looked at me with eyes full of sorrow. "Mr. Alexander didn't want to believe it either," he said. But he started to suspect and began checking everything. He sent food samples to the lab, and the result is what you see. I shook my head. Tears welled up and streamed down my cheeks. I didn't want to believe it. I couldn't believe that the woman Alexander loved, Chloe's mother, could do something like that. But the evidence was there, cold and undeniable. I looked at Chloe, who was in the corner of the room, her gaze fixed on a map. But I knew she was holding back confusion. I wanted to protect her, to keep her away from this horrible truth, but I didn't know where to start. Elias walked over to a small metal box on the table, opened it, and took out a red USB drive. "Mr. Alexander left this," he said, connecting the USB to the computer. The screen turned on, and several short videos appeared, recorded during the last months of Alexander's life. I sat in the chair, my hands trembling, as the first video began. Alexander appeared, sitting in this very basement, with the faint light of a lamp illuminating his gaunt face. "Mom," his voice cracked. "If you found this place, it's because my feeling was right. Someone is poisoning me. I don't know if it's for money or out of hatred, but Mom, you have to be very careful." Tears fell non-stop, sliding over my clenched hand. Alexander's voice, weak but firm, pierced my heart. I wanted to scream, to run and hug him, but he was only an image on the screen, a message from the other side. I looked at Elias, and with a trembling voice, I asked, "Why didn't my son tell me? Why did he have to endure it alone?" Elias lowered his head, as if he too carried a burden. "He said you were all he had. He didn't want you to live in fear. He didn't want you to face those people." Suddenly, a red alert appeared on the computer screen. "There is a remote access to the external drive." Elias turned pale. He quickly disconnected the power cord, and the screen went dark. He whispered urgently, "They know already. They know we've been in here." My heart stopped. "Who are they?" I asked. But Elias just shook his head, his gaze full of worry. He gestured for us to leave, and I pulled Chloe, quickly climbing the stairs. The smell of dampness still clung to me, but now it mixed with fear. When we left the barn, the intense red of the sunset covered the ranch, but it brought no warmth. It felt like a warning. Chloe grabbed my arm, her voice rushed. "Grandma, what's going on? Why did Dad say that?" Her eyes were shining with fear and confusion, as if pleading for an answer that I still couldn't give her. I hugged her shoulders tightly, my voice hoarse. "Someday you will know the truth, but not now, honey." I didn't want her to know that her father might have been poisoned, that the world she had always trusted was now full of shadows. As I walked out of the basement, I knew there was no going back. Maple Creek wasn't just land. It was my son's legacy, his blood, and his effort. I wasn't going to let people like Arthur and Evelyn take away the last thing Alexander left me. I called Mr. Ramirez, the lawyer, that same night, my voice trembling but firm. "I need you to help me," I said bluntly. "I have evidence, and I want to take it to court." "They can't steal Maple Creek, Ramirez." He arrived at the ranch the next morning with a worn leather briefcase and a serious expression. He sat at the dining room table in the main house. He reviewed the documents I took from the basement, one by one. He examined every video on the red USB drive. His face grew increasingly grim, his brow furrowed. "This evidence is very strong, Mrs. Betty," he said in a grave tone. "The lab reports, Alexander's videos, Elias's testimony, we have a basis to fight. But I must warn you, our opponents are not easy. Arthur's family has money, power, and a team of lawyers ready to twist everything." I nodded, though a cold chill ran through me. "I don't care how powerful they are," I replied, with a firmness that surprised me. "I only want justice for my son." Ramirez looked at me with a glimmer of compassion, but said nothing more, only nodded and promised to prepare everything for the trial. On the day of the trial, I walked into the courtroom with a heavy heart but steady steps. Chloe squeezed my hand. Her small hand trembled, but she didn't let go. Elias walked silently behind us, like a guardian, his gaze sharp, as if ready to face any threat. I looked around the room, the grey, cold walls, the benches full of people, and I felt like I was entering a battle arena. On the other side, Martha was next to her parents, the three of them exuding power and defiance. Arthur wore a sleek black suit, with an icy, knife-like stare. Evelyn sat upright, in a shimmering silk gown, but the slight smile on her lips dripped arrogance. Behind them was Mr. Lopez, a famous fox in the legal world, who gave me a haughty look, as if I were nothing more than easy prey. The trial began, and every second felt like a stab. Ramirez stood up and presented the evidence with clarity and firmness. He showed the USB with Alexander's videos, the reports on the tested food, and Elias's testimony about how Alexander had secretly built the war room to protect Maple Creek. I looked at the judge, hoping he would see the truth, that he would understand that my son had been betrayed, that he had fought to his last breath to defend this legacy. But then Mr. Lopez stood up, and all my hope collapsed. He refuted every piece of evidence with a chilling coldness and sharpness. "These videos can be edited," he said with a sarcastic tone, waving his hand as if performing. "We have no way to verify their authenticity." He turned to the lab report and grimaced a twisted smile. "This result does not prove who placed the substance. It only shows the presence of something, but there is no concrete evidence linking it to anyone in particular." I clenched my fists, my nails digging into my palms, trying to contain the rage. But Lopez didn't stop. He continued, his voice monotonous but charged with venom. "Maple Creek is an asset acquired before Alexander married Mrs. Martha. However, Mrs. Martha lived with him and contributed to that marriage. According to the law, she has a legitimate right to that property." He looked at me with eyes that seemed to tell me I had no chance. Then Arthur stood up. His voice resonated with authority, like a king dictating a sentence. "Your Honor," he said, "our family supported Alexander financially for many years. We paid his debts. We helped him build his career. We cannot allow all that effort to fall into the hands of a stranger like Mrs. Betty." His words were like a knife straight to the heart. A stranger, I, Alexander's mother, who brought him into the world and raised him, called a stranger. They even presented a witness, a middle-aged man with a disheveled moustache, who claimed to have signed a contract to buy land with Alexander, but that it was cancelled for no reason. "He acted strangely," he said dramatically. "I believe he wasn't in his right mind at the time." I wanted to shout that it was a lie, that my Alexander was always lucid and careful, but I could only stand there, helpless, watching them twist the truth. Lopez delivered the final blow. Alexander suffered from a severe heart condition. His decisions in the last stage of his life are not trustworthy. How can this court rely on a will made by someone on the verge of death? He looked at me with a twisted smile of triumph. Chloe suddenly stood up. Her voice trembled, but it was full of anger. My dad was completely lucid. I can testify. I know what he did for the ranch, but the judge raised his hand, cutting her off with a severe voice. Young lady, you are not old enough to testify. Sit down. Chloe looked at me, tears rolling down her cheeks, and I could only clutch her to my chest, hugging her tightly, trying to hide the desperation that was drowning me. The hearing ended with a provisional ruling in their favor. The judge declared that the administration of Maple Creek would temporarily remain in Martha's hands, pending the definitive trial. I felt the ground sink beneath my feet. I had presented all the evidence, all the truth about Alexander, and yet it wasn't enough. I looked towards Martha, hoping to find something of the daughter-in-law I once loved, but she was just there, with an empty gaze, as if I didn't exist. I walked out of the courtroom, my legs heavy as if weights were tied to them. The silence was so intense it was frightening. I could only hear the sound of my shoes hitting the wooden floor, mixing with the loud pounding of my heart. The judge's ruling kept echoing in my head. The temporary administration of Maple Creek remains in Martha's hands. Those words were like a stab, shattering all the hopes I had placed in this battle. I had presented all of Alexander's evidence, the videos, the analysis reports, Elias's testimony, but they weren't enough. I felt as if I had betrayed my son, as if I was letting him go a second time. In the hallway, Arthur and Evelyn approached, a triumphant smile on their lips that they didn't try to hide. Arthur leaned in, his voice whispered, cold and sharp as a blade. "See, Betty, we told you. You cannot win." I looked him straight in the eyes. I wanted to scream. I wanted to hit that arrogant face, but I just stood there, motionless, with a bitter knot in my throat. Evelyn stepped forward. Her silk robe brushed the air. Her voice was sweet but poisonous. "You'd better stay quiet. Don't try to fight for what isn't yours." Her words were like salt on a wound, making me want to shout that Maple Creek belonged to Alexander, my son, not to them. Martha walked past me. Her gaze was empty, without a hint of compassion. I looked at her, the daughter-in-law I once loved and considered a daughter, and felt my heart break. How could she sit there, in silence, while I fought for her husband's legacy? How could she allow her parents to turn me into a stranger? I wanted to call her, to ask her why, but before I could open my mouth, Chloe let go of my hand, her voice broken by tears. "Mum, why did you do that to Dad?" Her question was like a knife straight to the heart. Chloe ran towards her mother, her small shoulders trembling, but Martha just looked at the girl without saying a word, and then turned away, following Arthur and Evelyn. I stood there, helpless, watching my granddaughter run after a mother I no longer recognized. Every step Chloe took plunged me deeper into the abyss of despair. I wanted to run after her, hug her, tell her everything would be fine, but I knew I couldn't. Not now, when I didn't even understand what was happening. Elias appeared beside me, gently placing his hand on my trembling arm. "Don't break down, Mom," he said in a deep, firm voice. "Mr. Alexander surely has something prepared. We haven't lost." I looked at him. His eyes were full of determination, but I couldn't feel any hope. I just nodded, biting my lip to hold back the tears. Elias led me out of the hallway, through the crowd of journalists surrounding us. The flashes kept going off, blinding me. They were constantly shouting questions, their voices noisy as a swarm. "Mrs. Betty, what do you think of the ruling?" Are you going to continue the dispute? I didn't answer. I just lowered my head and walked out into the chilling rain that was falling. The rain soaked my clothes, freezing me to the bone, but I felt nothing but emptiness. I walked, step by step, like a machine, not knowing where I was going. Elias walked silently beside me, covering me with an umbrella. But I didn't want protection. I wanted the rain to wash everything away. The pain, the helplessness, and the shame that was choking me. I had lost not only to Arthur and Evelyn, but to myself. I had promised Alexander and Chloe that I would protect Maple Creek, but now I was left with nothing but a broken heart. That night I returned to the main house at Maple Creek, not my home in the city. I didn't want to face the familiar walls where Alexander's laughter once echoed. I sat in the library, among the books my son adored, with the faint yellow light illuminating the old leather bindings. I touched a book, my fingers grazing the letters engraved on the cover, and my tears fell. "Alexander, I'm sorry," I whispered, my voice hoarse. "I tried, but I wasn't strong enough." I remained motionless, letting the despair wash over me. The image of Chloe shouting at her mother, Martha's empty gaze, and Arthur's triumphant smile appeared in my mind, like a constantly repeating film, tormenting my thoughts. The next morning, the sunlight streamed through the library window. I was still there, wearing the same clothes from the night before, my eyes swollen from not sleeping all night. Suddenly, the doorbell rang, pulling me from my thoughts. I dragged myself to the door, and in front of me was Sarah, my sister. She was there, her grey hair pulled back, and her eyes so full of worry that I almost believed she genuinely cared. "Sister, I heard about it," Sarah said, her voice full of indignation. "I can't believe they were so brazen that they dared to take Maple Creek from you. Don't worry, I'll be by your side." She walked over and hugged me, and for an instant I felt as if I had found a little comfort. Sarah, the sister I grew up with, the one I shared the difficult days with after my husband's death, was here now, like a final support. I led her inside, inviting her to sit on the living room sofa. Chloe was upstairs, asleep after a night of crying. I told Sarah what had happened: the trial, the dismissed evidence, the arrogance of Arthur and Evelyn. But I kept the most delicate details to myself: the war room, the toxicology report, and Alexander's final message. Not because I didn't trust Sarah, but because I was afraid that telling her too much would put her in danger. "I don't know what to do now," I said in a flat voice. "But I won't give up. Alexander deserves justice." Sarah took my hand, her eyes full of empathy. "You are so strong," she told me. "Alexander would be proud of you. I will help you no matter what." Her words were like a balm, easing my pain a little. I thought that, at least, I still had someone to lean on, someone who understood me, who understood the value Maple Creek held for Alexander. But then, during lunch, everything changed. I got up to go to the other room to call Ramirez. I wanted to ask him about the next step in the legal battle. As I walked down the hallway, I caught a glimpse of Sarah sitting at the table, secretly typing a message. The phone screen lit up, and before she hastily hid it, I managed to read a phrase. "She still doesn't know anything else. Waiting for orders." My heart stopped. I froze, as if nailed to the floor. Sarah, my sister, with whom I had shared so many joys and sorrows, was writing to who? And who else could she be but me? I pretended not to have seen anything, entered the room, closed the door, and called Ramirez. I tried to keep my voice normal, talking about preparing the appeal, but my mind was only spinning around Sarah. How was it possible? How could my sister betray me? I remembered the times she asked me about Maple Creek, about Alexander's will, questions that at the time seemed harmless, but that now resonated, loaded with suspicion. I felt as if the ground beneath my feet was collapsing once again. That afternoon, Elias came to see me, his face tense. "Mrs. Betty," he murmured, leading me to a secluded corner near the stable. The security cameras on the farm were remotely accessed, and some important video files in the basement were erased. He paused, looking at me with worried eyes. "Someone knows we went in there. Someone is watching us." I felt the blood turn cold in my veins. Everything started to click. The black SUV following me, Arthur's threats, and now Sarah's message. I looked at Elias, my voice trembling. "Do you think someone in my own family is working for them?" Elias didn't answer right away, but his gaze said it all. He only nodded slightly, as if he had suspected it for a long time. That night I decided to test Sarah. I couldn't live with the doubt that was eating away at me. As we were having dinner, I spoke in a deliberately distracted tone. "Sarah, today I found something in the library, a notebook of Alexander's with important evidence. I think it could change the course of the trial." I watched her. I saw her gaze flicker for a second before she smiled. "Really, that's great news. You have to keep it safe." But I knew I wasn't wrong. A few hours later, when I left Sarah alone in the house, I hid in the garden, concealed in the shadows. Through the window I saw her whispering on the phone, her voice low but rushed. "I'll definitely get it tomorrow. I'll find a way." My heart broke. I stepped back, leaning against a tree, feeling the whole world collapse. Sarah, my own sister, whom I trusted more than anyone, was a spy for the enemy. I wanted to scream, to run and confront her, but I knew I couldn't. Not yet, not without enough proof. I returned to the house, pretending nothing had happened. Sarah looked at me, smiling, but that smile now only gave me chills. "Are you okay?" she asked sweetly. I nodded, forcing a smile. "Fine, just tired." But inside, I felt betrayed again, more profoundly than any previous pain. I had already lost Alexander. I had already lost my trust in Martha, and now even Sarah, my last family link, was turning her back on me. 2 weeks passed like an endless nightmare. I lived in tension and insecurity, preparing every day for the final trial, hoping that this time the truth about Alexander would come to light. Mr. Ramirez and I worked tirelessly, reviewing every detail of the expert reports, every second of Alexander's videos, and Elias's statements. I clung to the hope that justice would be on my side, that Maple Creek, my son's legacy, would be protected. But just before the trial, a devastating blow shattered all my hopes. The main newspapers published articles with sensational headlines. "Mother conspires to seize assets through fake will." Alexander's videos, the expert reports, everything was distorted into a fabricated story, as if I were a greedy woman trying to steal what didn't belong to me. I read those words, my heart heavy. Who did this? Who took my most valuable evidence and turned it into weapons against me? I knew who the culprit was. When I entered the courtroom on the last day of the trial, I saw Sarah sitting right next to Martha, with a defiant look, without a trace of the younger sister who once hugged me for comfort. I felt my blood run cold, as if the whole world had turned its back on me. Sarah, whom I had trusted more than anyone, was now there, arm in arm with Martha, as if they were intimate allies. I wanted to scream, to rush to confront her, but I just stood there, squeezing Chloe's hand, trying to contain the pain that was burning in my chest. The trial unfolded like a pre-rehearsed play, with every actor playing their role to perfection. Mr. Ramirez did everything possible. He presented the evidence again, emphasizing that Alexander's video was real and that the analysis results could not be faked. But Mr. Lopez, with that familiar, twisted smile of his, stood up and refuted everything one by one with chilling coldness. "These videos have no legal value," he said, his voice monotonous but sharp. "Anyone could have edited them. And the analysis results? There is no concrete evidence linking them to Mrs. Martha or anyone else." Then he turned to the judge, speaking with total conviction. "All we have here are the assumptions of a dying man, someone who was no longer in his right mind to make decisions." I bit my lip so hard I tasted the metallic flavor of blood. Lopez's words were like stabs, not only against me, but against Alexander, my son, who had spent his last days defending his legacy. I wanted to stand up, to shout that it was all a lie, that my Alexander was always lucid, always careful, but Ramirez placed a hand on my shoulder, shaking his head gently, urging me to stay calm. I looked at Chloe and saw her with her head bowed, her hands clenched, and tears falling silently. I knew she was also suffering because they were insulting her father, suffering because what we were trying to protect was slipping through our fingers. Arthur stood up, his voice full of authority, as if he were dictating everyone's destiny. "Your Honor, our family supported Alexander for many years. Not only did we help him financially, but we were also behind every one of his accomplishments. Maple Creek is a family asset, not something that a stranger, Mrs. Betty, can claim ownership of." His words were like a slap in the face. A stranger? I, Alexander's mother, the one who brought him into the world and raised him, reduced to a stranger in my own son's story. When the judge struck the gavel and officially declared that the inheritance belonged to Martha, the entire opposing side erupted in applause. I stood motionless, feeling the floor beneath my feet disappear. Chloe burst into tears, her voice broken by despair. "No, my dad left everything to my grandma." But her cry was drowned out by the commotion in the room. I hugged her tightly against my chest, trying to hide the pain that was tearing me apart inside. I couldn't let her see me fall. I couldn't let her think that everything was over. I shuffled out of the courthouse, under a torrential rain that soaked my clothes and chilled me to the bone. Under the entrance awning, Arthur and Evelyn were celebrating, shaking hands with Mr. Lopez, with triumphant smiles that they didn't bother to hide. Sarah was next to them, arm in arm with Evelyn as if they were great friends, and she gave me a look devoid of remorse. I bit my lips until they bled, and squeezed Chloe's hand, pushing through the crowd of journalists surrounding us, with flashes exploding non-stop. They were shouting questions, but I heard nothing. I just walked, clinging to Chloe, as if she were the only thing still keeping me standing. That night, I returned to the house at Maple Creek, not wanting to go back to my own home in the city. I couldn't face the memories of Alexander. I couldn't bear the emptiness of that house that I once thought was a refuge. I sat alone in the dark room. The yellow lamp in the library was already turned off. Only shadows covered everything. I was stunned, my gaze lost, feeling that everything I had trusted had vanished. Alexander was gone, his inheritance was stolen, and even Sarah, my sister, had betrayed me. I thought of the years we grew up together, the times she held my hand and promised me she would always be by my side. It was all a lie. Suddenly the phone on the table vibrated, and the screen lit up in the darkness. I was startled. My trembling hands picked it up. A message from an unknown number appeared, with only 5 words. "Mom, I am still alive." I froze. The phone slipped from my hands and fell to the floor with a dry clack. My heart was pounding hard, as if it wanted to jump out of my chest. Alexander? Could it be? I shook my head. tears streaming, not knowing if they were tears of hope or fear. Was it really my son? Or just a cruel joke from someone who wanted to plunge me even deeper into the abyss? If Alexander was alive, why didn't he come back? And if it was true, what terrible truth still awaited me? The story you have just heard has changed names and places to protect the identity of those involved. We are not sharing it to judge, but with the hope that someone listens and pauses to reflect. How many mothers suffer in silence within their own home? I really wonder, if you were in my shoes, what would you do? Would you choose to remain silent to keep the peace? Or would you dare to confront everything to reclaim your voice? I want to know your opinion, because every story can become a candle that lights the path for someone else. God always blesses, and I am convinced that courage will lead us to better days. For now, on the final screen, I will leave two of the channel's most beloved stories. I am sure they will surprise you. Thank you for staying with me until this moment.